you upset that you came out to this podium on Friday with incomplete and inaccurate information? And are you concerned that it affects your credibility up here?
Well, what I'm concerned about is making sure that we do not politically interfere in the Department of Justice, that we continue to be consistent.
Consistently opaque. Now, fortunately for us, we are getting some new details. Of course, they're not good. For instance, the White House has no visitor logs to the president's private homes. You know, the same places where the secret documents were squirreled away for God knows how long. So how do we know who might have had access to them? And if the administration keeps stonewalling, will we ever learn how this happened and how they got there in the first place? Joining me now to discuss from the great Commonwealth of Kentucky, Republican Congressman and Chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer is here. Welcome, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
So of the myriad of outstanding questions that we've got here, what is the very first one you would like answered?
Well, we obviously want to know what level of documents that the president had in storage all around. We want to know if there are more documents. We want to know who had access to those documents. And even more importantly, we want to know who these lawyers are that are working privately for the President of the United States that do not have security clearance, that are still allowed, apparently, to rummage around that house looking for additional documents even after the special counsel's been announced. So we have a lot of questions for this White House, and I think the majority of Americans are with us in our request for information with respect to this.
So I think there are, we've been talking a lot about independent voters in this country, people who are not affiliated, at least publicly, with either of the two major parties. So having said that, I think there are a lot of people out there who would like some uniformity in terms of if we know who's going to see the president, no matter where that is there anything Congress can do to ensure that no matter who the president is, if it's a male or a female, a Republican, a Democrat, hopefully at some point, maybe a libertarian, is there some law you can pass to force the president to keep logs and release them?
I think you're going to see a lot of reforms that will pass the Republican majority in the House. Hopefully they'll pass the Senate. But at the end of the day, I think we would all agree that people should know who the President of the United States is meeting with. And I think at the end of the day, we need to have clarification from the National Archives and a process to where we know exactly what type of documents are allowed to be removed from the White House or the vice president's residence once their term in office ends, and who's in charge of that. Look, this is chaos out here with the National Archives. And what's astonishing to me is how outraged the Democrats were that the former president of the United States may have possessed some classified documents, who, remember, the president has the authority to declassify documents, and that's what the argument with Trump and the National Archives was all along. But then, they just blow it off as a big nothing burger when the president, who was only vice president and didn't have the authority to declassify documents, has all these documents strode out in multiple locations. And, the reaction from the White House and the press secretary is, well, it's no big deal. We're doing the right thing. Our private lawyers are turning everything over. Case closed.
So if there were a Republican president and there were an FBI raid of President Biden's office, let's say he's former president, do you think there would be outrage from Democrats if there were, in fact, parity in the way the documents were assessed and captured?
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned a great point talking about independent voters. The independent voter has to be sitting back thinking, why is there a raid on the former president's residence by the FBI? Why did they take security cameras? Why did they go through his son and his wife's bedrooms and their closets? But yet the FBI hasn't set foot on either properties where Joe Biden had classified documents. And in fact, he's letting his personal attorney still conduct a search for classified documents, which they don't have the authority to even be near. and there's nothing being done here. So there's a double standard here. I think every American realizes that, and it goes along with what Republicans have been saying for many months now. There's a two-tier system of justice now at the DOJ under Merrick Garland and Joe Biden, and this is a perfect example.
Yes, it is. It is not equal protection under the law. We've been talking about that pretty consistently as well. Now, the president is president now. He has the power to declassify these things. If the documents are innocuous and there's nothing to see here, if it is in fact a nothing burger, don't you think the president would have declassified them already?
Well, the president's already said he had no idea what those documents were. So he can't come back now and say, well, he declassified them, when he said, according to Joe Biden, he's never even seen the documents. Now, that's when he did the interview with Peter Dowsey.
Well.
I know, exactly. That's my whole point. The fact that he doesn't know what those documents are or who had access to them, that's even more concerning than if he did have knowledge of those documents, and he did know who had access to those documents.
Then he could wave his presidential declassification wand. The whole thing is only getting stranger. You certainly have your hands full. Congressman Comer, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.